waves. We're going to do something a little bit different this time, talk about something a little bit darker, and that would be Paradise Lost's 1993 classic, Icon. Just got a new re-recording and reissue this year, with the sky getting darker, with the nights getting colder, and now's a great time to talk about this classic of the gothic metal genre. We're going to go into its history, its songs, and how it holds up today. This is a sound not unlike that of being alone in an old castle, with nothing but your own footsteps echoing behind you, and the light of a flickering candle to light the way. Enjoy.
Yeah, I think that about sums up what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, so, of course, Paradise Lost's Icon was released in the year of 1993, and while talking about this record, it would be kind of remiss to not discuss the climate musically in which it was recorded, and also the genre it helped heavily influence. Of course, we're talking about gothic metal. We're not going to do a whole history dive into this, but it is important to understanding this record and a lot about it. So gothic, what we're referring to is, if you think Dracula or you think Frankenstein, that's a pretty good idea of what to go for. We're talking moody, dark, grotesque, almost a bit romantic. Moonspell had a quote in one of their songs, beauty and death, inner turmoil, horror, and a lot of that came out in gothic rock, which began in the late 70s, early 80s with bands like Bauhaus and Joy Division. They used tribal drumming, overall melancholy, sharp guitars, very poetic, dark lyrics, and much like Edgar Allan Poe. Dark romanticism, morbid, madness, and sorrow. And then it developed into a little bit into metal in the 80s with a band called Celtic Frost, showing more symphonic elements, moaned vocals, kind of like death, dying, gasp kind of moans, female backing vocals. And then fast forward a bit into the early 90s, and we have a collection of bands called the Peaceville Three, signed to the label Peaceville Records in the UK. Those three being My Dying Bride, Anathema, and of course, Paradise Lost. And so, Paradise Lost in particular, one of the albums before this ones was called Gothic, where of course they coined the phrase gothic metal. But it's with Icon that Nick Holmes, the frontman, believes that they completely started the genre, and fair enough, everything after this thing sounds just like it, or sounds like they definitely were fans of it. So at this point in Paradise Lost's career, they were moving away from death metal, going towards something a bit more melodic and a bit more, not necessarily accessible, but a bit more universal. The only thing it really has in common with the time period is the vocals, which sound kind of like James Hetfield from Metallica, but a bit darker. In general, we have a much more riffy, kind of modern record with a really thick atmosphere. Any history on goth to add there, Isaac?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. I'm not really too familiar with that stuff and that genre, excuse me. What are your thoughts initial, unless you have more to say, what are your initial thoughts of this album?
So I actually didn't get into Icon for a bit. My experience with Paradise Lost was mostly with the album afterwards called Draconian Times, which, even though we're talking about Icon here, I think that one does one-up this album a little bit in terms of sophistication, but at the same time, Icon is obviously a record very worth talking about. This is an absolutely stellar example of gothic metal. We have generally pretty straightforward riffing patterns with mostly a use of power chords. We have lyrics that are, dark, moody, not necessarily depressing, but just they're not positive. They're slightly romantic. We have some horror themes and some horror elements too. But to me, what really stands out about this one is the sense of melody. So while we have some very good playing and very good vocals all across the board, it's the guitar leads and the solos. This record is just an absolute masterclass in how to write solos, leads, and guitar harmonies. There's one in almost every song, a moment where you just like, whoa, look, that is, especially this one song, Widow, halfway through the record is an absolute, once again, masterclass in guitar leads and solos. The solos are the catchiest part of that song, just about. The vocals are excellent as well. Nick Holmes trying out more of a James Hetfield-esque kind of bellow to him. It works very well. He has a bit more emotional inflection than Hetfield usually does, though. The death metal elements are mostly gone. There's still quite a bit of gruffness in the vocals, and as for gothic metal, like Ember's Fire and True Belief remain genre classics to this day and staple examples of how to do the genre well. The songwriting especially is also very interesting, with it generally being kind of that verse-chorus-verse style we all know and love from most pop music, but there's enough little tweaks and little surprises here and there before, after the choruses, different bridges, different solos, different parts. Like, this is a damn good record. Arguably the last Metallica comparison, I swear, Black Album of the gothic metal genre.
It definitely has a sense of language to it that you would probably find in a perhaps a romantic period novel of maybe like the late 19th century.
Yes, absolutely.
Flowing with different lyrics. Yeah, that's the thing when it comes to Gothic I know of, which is it's very obviously lyrics are a big thing with metal itself, but this one really devotes itself to having lyrics that I don't want to keep saying romantic, but definitely not light and fluffy, because it definitely contrasts with like the heavy tones that they're setting with the instruments itself.
For sure.
Yeah, no, it's I definitely the language is definitely, you have to listen to it. And I didn't get a chance to listen deeply to each of the lines, but I was wondering if there was recurring language throughout this entire album. If they were like going on to something and going through a theme.
You're actually nail on the head there with talking about romance. Gothic, there's a lot of notes about dark romance and failed romance. I mean, Edgar Allan Poe, Lenore, Annabel Lee. It's usually relating to death or tragedy because, well, Gothic. So yeah, you're nail on the head there. In terms of language, I have read through the lyrics of this record. Generally, they're pretty dark, obviously. Failed relationships, madness, overcome with emotion, kind of bleak. Not necessarily violent, I would say, but just almost like sick feeling, very sickly, I would describe part of it as well. There's a little bit that remains of the band's previous doom metal influences in the sense that the tempos on some songs are a bit slower, but for the most part, this is generally pretty up-tempo too, and allows it to be just generally a fairly accessible record, even if you have no experience with this genre at all. But what did you think of, especially when it comes to the instrumentals? What were your thoughts regarding that?
It was definitely making me. I was like, oh yeah, this is metal. I was okay. How do they differ? I'm not saying I hear Metallica, but I'm definitely like, okay, how do they differ from their peers around this time? What do you think? Do they distinguish themselves and are different from their peers around the same time?
That's a great question. So My Dying Bride, one of the other Peaceville bands, very much stayed in their Gothic death doom metal corner, and nothing wrong with that. They do it very well. Anathema actually pulled a complete 180. I want to talk about Anathema on this channel because they pulled a complete 180 away from death doom metal and kind of went in more of a Pink Floyd direction, which is totally didn't see that coming, anybody really, but they did that fantastically up until the end of their career. In terms of this one, the big thing I would say was that there's not a lot of flashiness here. I could sing a lot of praise about the guitar solos and the leads, and I have already. I know it's getting a bit old, but there's not a lot of technicality or flashiness. It's just really, really well-written melodies, and this is one of Paradise Lost's most defining features as a band. They're not so much a riff band or a gigantic chorus band. They just are really good at writing really catchy, really effective melodies. That's their biggest strength.
Yeah, you're right with that. I did notice there. I was wondering if they did repeat a bunch of chord progressions. I wonder if there was a lot of notes and chords that they went back to. They set it up, in the beginning with like Ember's Fire, and then they kind of. I was wondering if they repeated it throughout the album itself, and I did hear it a few times. I'm not specific on which tracks it was that I remember it, but I definitely know that there was a few progressions there that were callbacks to the beginning.
So definitely, I mean, if you're asking about what kind of chord progression or keys they use throughout the record, well, minor scales, Aeolian scales, for those who don't know, are typically used to convey haunting, depressing melodies, and it goes without saying in a genre like Gothic or doom metal, that's kind of going to be the rule of thumb. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of bands do that and sound like that, and it does make for some excellent melodies, but the defining feature of a lot of doom metal, to me anyways, is, and people will ask you all the time, like, why do you listen to such depressing music? The defining feature of doom metal in this record does it very well too, is honestly there's a bit of hope. That's what's so cool about those leads and those melodies, is despite the music being darker and depressing, they just absolutely soar. Like they sound, it's almost like there's a bit of hope among the darkness, and that's just, to me, is always just so cool to hear how you can be listening to something that's so color-wise just so damn black, so damn dark, but at the same time just makes you feel good. That's always been such a cool feature of this style of music to me.
What did you think of the length of the album itself at about 50 minutes 32 seconds?
I remember one of the times I was listening to this record as a whole, and I saw that most of the tracks are between that 3.5 to 4 minute mark, and honestly I'm happy with that, because a lot of doom metal bands will, because the tempos tend to be a lot slower and the songs tend to be more drawn out, a lot of them write songs between the 7 to 9 minute range, so having that brevity is actually kind of nice here. Isaac, what are your thoughts on the production of this record? So and we're going to get to it in a moment here, Icon was recently remastered and re-recorded this past December, for reasons I'll get into in a moment as well, but what are you thinking? Like, do you think this is well produced? How does it sound in relation to everything else you've heard from that time period?
Thank you for the question. I think it sounds very good. I think the production-wise, it sounds, I don't want to say tight and or streamlined, but definitely the producers had a sound in mind, or at least, well, the band as well, of course, they had a sound in mind. And I think for the production-wise, I was also kind of, first time around, I was like, okay, so when you have a name like Paradise Lost, I'm very much expecting some very like gothic, well, of course it's gothic, but I'm thinking maybe Latin chanting or something like filled with dread potentially, but like you said, there's still like, there's a romance to it. Even if it does get like really dark, as you said, there's just this like underlying sense of hope and like, okay, we can maybe like get out of here. While I was a little bit disappointed at first that, I didn't hear any like violins or strings. I mean, obviously guitars and bass are strings. I was listening to it again. I was like, okay, no, you know what they're trying to do with the guitars? They're mimicking. They're mimicking violins, and I can hear like
I can hear that.
Almost like I can hear them like acting instead as violins in that sense, as if we were listening to an orchestra. Much I guess reduced in numbers, of course, but they were doing their best with it, and so yeah, I'm definitely a fan of the production aspect. How about you? What do you think of the production of this album?
Honestly, one of my thoughts, because I listened to Icon originally a lot, especially when I heard the remaster was coming out. I listened to it a lot throughout the month of November in particular, and then I listened to the Icon 30 probably until a week ago, and then I switched back before I knew we were having this conversation, and my first thoughts were just, this sounds fine. It sounds, for its time period, it's really not, like, it's not Black Album production. For those who don't know, Metallica's Black Album, they literally had a budget of $1 million. So this is, of course, not on that level, but it doesn't need to be. Like, everything sounds fine. Like, there's a murk to it, but you kind of see that with the early mid-90s metal records anyways. That kind of helps with the darkness, or it sounds pretty authentic. The bass tends to get hidden a little bit, but overall, the vocals, the guitars, everything sounds totally fine. But seeing as we're talking about the production, let's just get to that here. So, problem was that due to the record deal at the time, I don't know what corner of hell this got drawn up, but essentially the company that originally had the rights to the label dissolved, and they were kind of sold off at random. So the band basically, for whatever happened, it's a bit of a legal mishap, the band actually no longer had the rights to this album and the music, which is kind of messed up. So they decided they're going to fully re-record this and re-release it with new arrangement, new production. Of course, this naturally scared some people because they're tampering with the classic, so to speak. But at the same time, it was a necessary move for the band to reclaim their work. So I had no problems hearing about this at all. And most people were generally pretty supportive once they heard the reasons. So now, Isaac, the $1 million question, remaster or original?
Ooh, yeah, no, that's a difficult question, isn't it?
It's tough.
It is.
It's actually pretty tough.
When I listened to it, I could hear a slight difference. I could hear almost an improvement, like almost, because the equipment itself, I don't know if they were recording on I don't want to say outdated or obsolete, but I don't know if they were recording with equipment from the 90s or whatever malarkey and unholy magic they did with the sound engineers did make it sound 90s. But I definitely, like, later on, I was like, I could, like, towards like the later end of the track or the album, excuse me, I could start to hear like, okay, it's not one for one, but I can hear like the modern stuff, but it definitely is still in the spirit. Definitely is still in the spirit.
I agree. The biggest differences I noticed were that the drums hit a lot harder, which I think is very beneficial for this record. The bass is still, I could hear it, but it's still kind of buried. Nick's vocals, he's developed a lot over the years, and it shows. I think his voice sounds more distinctive now, but he's a lot more gravelly and his clean sound better, but that's just going to come with age. So I also like how he has a kind of younger energy to him in the original too, so that's almost even. But to me, the big thing is the remaster really allowed those liquid gold guitar leads to just completely pop out and rise above the mix, and I love that as a musician, being able to clearly hear every single note of those, because they are perfection to me. But at the same time, like, it's hard. The original does have a distinctive atmosphere of its time. I think as a listening experience, I'm honestly maybe gonna lean towards the remaster, because I just love how his voice sounds. I love how heavy the drums are, and I love how clear it is. But the original is still excellent. Like, it didn't need to be replaced. We don't need the remaster other than for the band's legal issues, which once again, totally understandable. I don't know. They're both there for us to enjoy now. I want to get a copy of Icon 30 to support the band. That's those are my thoughts on that right there. Do you enjoy the record?
Absolutely. No, I think I would definitely put this on. So, one time it's like, I'm going to throw Icon on, and then the next time it's like, I'm going to throw Icon 30 on. And maybe I will hear the differences as we mentioned. But then I'll afterwards again, later on down the line, I'll listen back to Icon. I'll just switch. I'll just, keep switching every now and then because I can at least, hear the original and then I can hear the remaster, and they're not so different from each other, but it's like, why not? It's like, I might as well be able to. So I definitely, I think I would highly recommend this to our listeners, and go and listen to this, please.
Indeed, if you're especially in these dark months, if you need something that kind of gets it, that kind of gets the emotion of those days where the sun goes down really early, a bit more pessimistic, almost a little bit angry. This is definitely the record for you. If you like Metallica, like the Black Album era, you like that kind of heavy, gravelly sound that they have. Fantastic gothic metal record, great intro into the genre, and an absolute blast to listen to whenever it is. So crank that thing up to 10 on the next dark, rainy night, pour yourself a nice blood-like glass of red wine, and have a good time. We'll see you guys in the next one.